The last time my grandfather raised his belt against me, I smiled. What do those papers say, Grandpa? The ones you hide? That day, the executioner realized the lamb had learned to bite, and that there was poison in the bite. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, my dear friends. What an immense joy to chat with you today. I'm Eleanor May Thompson, 78 years young, born in a small town called Millbrook in rural Alabama, but nowadays I live in this peaceful little town of Coopersville, Pennsylvania. Time passes, but memories remain stored in our minds, don't they? Today, after having my morning coffee with the cornbread I baked at dawn, I'm sitting here on my front porch in the rocking chair my late husband made for me more than 30 years ago. From here I can see my backyard, where I keep my greatest passion, my small book restoration workshop. Look at these shelves. Each book here has its own story beyond the story told in its pages. This one here, look, is a dictionary from 1932 that was almost falling apart when it came into my hands. I spent 3 weeks gluing each page, sewing the spine, redoing the cover with real leather. It turned out beautifully, don't you think? I started this work by chance, about 20 years ago. A neighbor had a recipe book from her grandmother that was falling to pieces, and she asked for my help to save it. I had never done that before, but I've always had skilled hands, and most importantly, patience. I researched, studied, and ended up falling in love with the art of giving new life to forgotten books. Today, people from neighboring towns bring me their paper treasures to restore. It's meticulous work, you know. Each stitch, each gluing, each restoration of a stained page. It needs attention, care, and above all, respect for the history those pages carry. Perhaps that's why I like it so much. Books taught me that words have power, that knowledge liberates, and to be able to preserve that, there's nothing like it. Oh, my dear friends, before I continue, I'd like to ask a small favor from the heart. If this story touches your heart, please leave a like and subscribe to Grandparents' Tales. It helps this old lady here continue sharing her stories. And tell me in the comments, which town are you watching from? And what time of day did you find this video? Early morning with coffee, after lunch, or late at night? I always read all the comments, and I'm so happy to know where you're from and when you take time out of your day to listen to this grandmother's stories. Let me know, okay? Let's create a chain of affection. Today, I want to tell a story that I've kept in my heart for many years. A story about how words can be both chains that imprison and keys that liberate. About how knowledge can be the most powerful weapon there is, especially when everyone thinks you have no weapon at all. Have you ever noticed how sometimes what people fear most in us is precisely what they cannot see? That's how it was in my life. What my grandfather despised most in me ended up being what freed me from his clutches. But let's take it slow, because this story begins long ago, on an isolated farm in rural Alabama, where the sun punishes the land and laws are made by those who have the most strength. Let me take you back to my childhood, so you understand how it all began. I was born and raised on a farm far from everything, about 2 hours by wagon from the nearest town. It was a large property with corn and cotton fields, some fruit trees, and an area for raising cattle. Built by my great-grandfather Jeremiah, the main house sat on top of a small hill, from where you could see almost the entire property. A house with thick walls, small windows, and a wide porch that wrapped around the entire front. My mother, Josephine, whom everyone called Josie, was a petite woman of few words. She had brown eyes that were always downcast and rough hands from working so hard. My father, Augustus, was tall, a field worker who left before sunrise and returned when it was already dark. He was a good man, but absent, always seeming too tired to talk or play. We had a modest life, but we didn't go hungry like many neighbors. And that was thanks to my grandfather Everett, my mother's father and owner of all that land. Tall, with white hair and a face that was always stern, he was what people back then called a respected man, which often meant a feared man. He always wore a leather hat, even inside the house, and a wide belt that was part of him as if it were a piece of his own body. In that house lived the 5 of us, Me, my parents, my grandfather Everett, and my grandmother Donna, a thin lady who spoke so softly that sometimes I had to get closer to understand what she was saying. I had 2 younger siblings, Anthony, who died as a baby from fever, and Celeste, who arrived when I was 8 years old. Our house was governed by my grandfather's strict rules. The time to wake up, to eat, to work, to pray, everything had its right moment. Woe to anyone who disrespected them. As Grandpa Everett used to say, everything in its place and everyone's place is knowing their size. And in his hierarchy, children, especially girls, were almost nothing. My routine began early, before the sun even appeared. I helped my mother and grandmother prepare breakfast and then went to take care of the chickens, feed them corn, collect the eggs. When I returned, I had to sweep the yard, help in the kitchen, sort beans, peel potatoes, work that never ended. After lunch, while the adults rested a little, it was my obligation to wash the dishes and pans, using a large basin in the yard and soap my grandmother made from ashes. My small hands would get red and cracked in the cold, but nobody cared about that. A girl's hands are born ready for work, my grandfather would say. Playtime was scarce and hidden. When I had a little time, I would make dolls from corn husks with scraps of cloth. Sometimes I managed to play with Mrs. Dora's daughters, who lived on the neighboring property. We would make little houses out of straw, play cooking games with wild fruits, make up stories. But it had to be quick, because if my grandfather found out I was wasting time with nonsense, his belt would speak louder. In our region at that time, school was a rare thing. There was one in town, but it was far away, and my grandfather said that studying doesn't fill bellies or make a man work properly. For him, knowing how to sign your name was already a lot, and for a woman, not even that was necessary. A woman needs to know how to pray, cook, and obey, he always repeated whenever the subject was education. Religion was another pillar of that house. My grandfather, even without knowing how to read, knew entire passages of the Bible from hearing the pastor say them so often. He mixed Christian teachings with rural superstitions, creating his own code of what was right and wrong, sin and virtue. And woe to anyone who questioned it. Every night before bed, he gathered the family to pray the rosary. Kneeling in the living room, with the only oil lamp lit, we repeated the Hail Marys and Our Fathers while he commanded with a grave voice. If any of us dozed off or made a mistake with the words, punishment would come the next day. There was something about me that bothered my grandfather since I can remember. They said I was born with eyes that see far. I observed everything, silently, as if storing every detail inside me. When he spoke, I didn't look away like my mother did. I kept my eyes on his for a second longer than he found acceptable. This made him furious. "This girl has a defiant look," he would say. "She's in league with the enemy." My grandmother Donna, when we were alone, defended me in her silent way. "It's nothing like that, my little granddaughter. You're just curious. But please, lower your eyes when your grandfather speaks. It costs nothing and avoids trouble." It was when I was 9 years old that things started to get more difficult for me. My grandfather, who was never a gentle man, began to find fault with any little thing I did. If I took a little longer to do a task, if I dropped a glass, if I didn't respond immediately when called, everything was a reason for him to say I was full of evil spirits and needed to be corrected. And it was at this time that the first purification ritual, as he called it, happened. I remember it as if it were yesterday. I had spilled a bucket of freshly milked cow's milk. It was an accident. I tripped on a stone. But to my grandfather, that was a sign that the devil was acting through me. "Come with me," he said, holding my arm tightly. He dragged me to the barn where we kept tools and corn. A dark place, smelling of earth and mold. Inside, he closed the door. He took off his belt, that thick leather belt with a heavy metal buckle. "It's for your own good," he said. "I'm going to drive the demon out of your body." What happened next? Well, you can imagine. I returned to the house with my back burning and dry eyes. I had learned that crying only made things worse. My mother looked at me with sadness, but said nothing. My father wasn't even home. And my grandmother, Donna, only managed to secretly apply some sweet fennel to the marks when everyone had gone to sleep. That was the first of many rituals. Any slip, any word out of turn, any look he deemed inappropriate, there we went to the barn. Over time, I learned to be invisible, to do everything right, to speak as little as possible. But even so, sometimes it wasn't enough. What no one knew, not even my mother or grandmother, was that I had a secret. A secret that began that same year, a few months after the first purification ritual. It was when Miss Lydia came to our region. A traveling teacher who journeyed from community to community, giving classes to those who could pay, or, in some cases, in exchange for food and lodging. She appeared at our farm on a rainy afternoon, asking for shelter for a few days until the roads improved. My grandfather, who respected educated people despite despising education, allowed her to stay in the back room, provided she helped with household chores. An extra mouth to feed must have hands to work, he said. Miss Lydia was different from all the people I had ever met. She wore small round glasses, had gray hair always tied in a bun, and carried a worn briefcase that I later discovered was full of books and notebooks. She spoke differently, used words I had never heard, and told stories of places so distant they seemed from another world. At night, when everyone was asleep, I sometimes spied on her through the crack in the door. She would light a small lamp and read her books, making notes in a notebook. That fascinated me. Seeing those designs on paper transform into stories, into knowledge, into windows to other worlds. It was like magic. One night she caught me spying. Instead of scolding me, she smiled and motioned for me to come in. "You want to learn to read, don't you?" she asked softly. I nodded, my heart pounding. "Then we'll start tomorrow. But it must be our secret. Your grandfather can't know." And so began the secret lessons. In the few moments we could be alone, while I fetched water, while I gathered firewood, or at night, when everyone thought I was sleeping, Miss Lydia taught me letters, sounds, words. She had a thin little book with a faded blue cover called First Readings, which she hid inside my sleeping mat when we weren't using it. I learned quickly. Miss Lydia said I had a thirst for knowledge, that my eyes lit up when discovering a new word. In a few weeks, I could already read simple sentences, and in 2 months, short stories. When the rain stopped and the roads dried up, Miss Lydia had to leave. On the eve of her departure, she called me behind the chicken coop. "I have a present for you," she said, taking 2 small books from her briefcase. One was First Readings, which we knew well. The other was a storybook with colorful pictures. "Keep practicing," she said. "Reading is a light that no one can extinguish within you." I hid the books in a hole I dug under my bed, covered by a loose board. At night, when everyone was asleep, I would light a small candle stub that I had pilfered from the kitchen and read, whispering the words to myself, feeling each one like a small miracle. What I didn't know was that those books, those words, that knowledge my grandfather so despised, would one day be my salvation. But that's part of the story I'll tell you shortly. The years went by, and my secret grew along with me. After Miss Lydia left, I kept those 2 precious little books, which I read and reread in hiding until I almost knew them by heart. But I wanted more. I needed more words, more stories, more knowledge. That's when I discovered that my grandfather Everett kept some books and papers locked in a drawer in his office, a small room where he did the farm accounts and kept documents, a place forbidden to everyone, especially me. "Never enter here without my permission," he would say. "This is men's business, not for girls." That prohibition only increased my curiosity. What was in there that was so important? What did my grandfather, who so despised books and education, guard with such zeal? By 12, I was quite different from that frightened girl before. On the outside, I remained obedient, eyes lowered, doing everything as he commanded. But inside, inside I had a world of my own, made of words and dreams that no one could touch. The purification rituals continued. Any slip still took me to the barn, to the belt, to the harsh words about casting demons out of my body. But now I had a place inside me where he couldn't reach, a refuge made of stories and knowledge. On a very hot afternoon, something happened that would change everything. My grandfather rode out on horseback to fix a problem with the pasture fence, taking my father with him. My mother and grandmother were in the yard, hanging clothes, and my little sister Celeste, who was now 4 years old, was sleeping. The house was quiet, and the office was unlocked. My heart was beating so hard I thought everyone could hear it. I looked out the window. My mother and grandmother were still outside, their backs to the house. It was now or never. I entered the office, stepping so lightly I hardly seemed to touch the floor. The room smelled of tobacco and old leather. There was a dark wooden desk, 2 chairs, a small cabinet, and a shelf with some books. Few, but to me at that moment, they seemed like treasure. I ran my fingers along the spines. An accounting book, an old almanac, a large and heavy Bible, and another book without a title on the cover. I pulled this last one out carefully. It was heavy, bound in brown leather, its pages yellowed by time. When I opened it, my heart almost stopped. It was a book of laws. Laws about land, about properties, about inheritances. I began to read, fascinated, understanding only part of what was written, but feeling that there was something important there. Suddenly, I heard a horse whinny. I ran to the window. My grandfather was returning. I put the book back on the shelf, exactly as it was, and left the office with my heart pounding. I reached the kitchen in time to pretend I was sweeping the floor when he entered. That first secret visit to the office opened a door within me. Now I knew there was more knowledge there, within my reach if I was careful. I began to plan my visits for when he was away. Sometimes I could stay for only a few minutes. Other times I had more time. I read a little from each book, discovering new words, new ideas, new worlds. It was during one of these secret visits, a few months later, that I found the box. It was at the bottom of the desk drawer, hidden under some papers. A small wooden box with a simple lock. The key hung on a nail behind the cabinet. I had seen my grandfather take it a few times when he thought no one was looking. Taking the key, opening the box, removing the documents, all with trembling hands, ears alert to any noise. Inside were yellowed papers, some with official seals, others with signatures I didn't recognize. I began to read, slowly, trying to understand that formal language, full of terms I had never seen. Gradually, like pieces of a puzzle, the story formed in my head. Those papers told how my grandfather had obtained those lands, not by inheritance, as he always said, but by taking them from his own brothers through forged documents. The papers spoke of fraud, of falsified signatures, of bought witnesses. They showed how he had manipulated my great-grandfather Jeremiah's will, making it appear that he was the only legitimate heir, when in fact the land should have been divided among 3 brothers. One of the documents was a letter written by my great-uncle Jeremy, my grandfather's older brother, addressed to the county judge. In it, he accused Everett of fraud and asked for justice. The letter had never been delivered. My grandfather must have intercepted it somehow. At the end was a phrase that chilled me. "If anything happens to me, your honor should know it was at the hands of my brother Everett." I heard voices outside. Quickly, I put everything back in the box, closed it, returned the key to its place, and left the office, my heart beating like a drum. That night, I couldn't sleep. The words from those documents danced in my head. My grandfather wasn't just a cruel man. He was a criminal, a thief who had robbed his own family. In the days that followed, I returned to the office several times, whenever I had the chance. I read and reread the documents, memorizing details, understanding more and more what had happened. I discovered that Uncle Jeremy had died in a horse fall shortly after writing that letter. The other brother, Uncle Joseph, had disappeared after an argument with my grandfather. The purification rituals continued, perhaps even more frequently. My grandfather seemed to always be angry, always looking for reasons to punish me. One day, after taking me to the barn for having taken too long to fetch water, he said something that made me realize I was in greater danger than I had imagined. "You have the same eyes as him," he muttered, more to himself than to me, while he tightened the belt in his hand. "The same eyes as Jeremy. That look that seems to see through people." It was then that I understood. He feared me. Not for the demons he said I had inside me, but for what I might discover, for what I might see. And that gave me a chill, because I had already discovered it. That night, lying on my mat, feeling my back burn under the thin dress, I made a decision. I needed to make copies of those documents. I didn't know yet how or why, but something inside me said those papers were my only protection. Luckily, that same month, Timothy, the old cowhand who had worked for my grandfather for years, brought me a gift. A small notebook and a pencil which he had bought in town. "For you to practice your letters," he said, winking. Timothy was one of the few who knew my secret, who had seen me reading in hiding a few times, but never betrayed me. On the contrary, sometimes he brought me old newspaper clippings or product labels to read. With the notebook and pencil, I began my work. Whenever I could, I went to the office and copied excerpts from the documents, the most important ones, the ones that proved the fraud. It was slow, meticulous work, but I had patience. It took me almost a month to copy everything I thought was essential. When I finished, I hid the notebook in the same hole under the bed where I kept my books. But that didn't seem enough. If my grandfather found it, I would be lost. I needed a safer place, away from the farm. That's when I thought of Miss Betty, the midwife who lived at the entrance to town. A lady respected by everyone, even by my grandfather, who didn't dare defy her openly. She came to the farm from time to attend to my grandmother, who suffered from joint pains. I always helped her, carrying her bag of herbs, listening attentively to her explanations about each plant, each remedy. She liked me, said I had healer's hands. The next time Miss Betty came, I would give her the notebook to keep. She would know what to do with it if something happened to me. While I waited for Miss Betty's visit, the rituals got worse. My grandfather seemed increasingly irritated, more violent. Any little thing was reason to drag me to the barn. "I'll drive the demon out of you if it's the last thing I do," he would shout, his face red with fury. One night, after a particularly severe punishment, I heard something I'll never forget. I was in my corner, pretending to sleep, when I heard my parents talking softly. "He'll end up killing the girl," my mother whispered, her voice choked. "What do you want me to do, Josie?" my father replied, tired. "He owns all this. If we interfere, we'll be without a roof, without food." "But she's our daughter." I know. Let's try to send her to your sister's house in Birmingham when she turns 14. Until then, teach her not to provoke your father." Provoke? I had never provoked my grandfather. I just existed, just breathed, just had the look he feared because it reminded him of the brother he had. What? Killed? The word echoed in my head, terrible, but making a sense I didn't want to accept. It was that same week that what I feared most happened. My grandfather discovered that someone had been in the documents. I don't know how. Maybe I left something out of place, a mark, a sign. He gathered the whole family in the living room, his face livid with anger. "Someone entered my office," he said, looking each of us in the eyes. "Someone messed with my things." No one answered. My mother and grandmother looked at the floor. My father kept his face impassive. My little sister, not understanding what was happening, clung to my mother's skirts. When his gaze reached me, I tried to lower my eyes, as I had learned to do. But it was too late. He saw something in my face, some sign of guilt or fear. "It was you," he said, almost in a whisper. It wasn't a question. What happened next was the worst ritual of all. He dragged me to the barn, locked the door, and this time it wasn't just the belt. He also used a piece of rope, shouting all the time that he was going to cast out the demon from me, that I was just like Jeremy, that I wanted to destroy everything he had built. When I returned to the house, I could barely walk. My mother tried to help me, to put some medicine on the wounds, but my grandfather wouldn't let her. "She needs to feel the pain to learn," he said. "Tomorrow will be worse if she doesn't confess what she saw and where she hid it." That night, lying in my corner, feeling every part of my body burn like fire, I made the most important decision of my life. I could no longer wait for Miss Betty. I could no longer wait for anything. The next time he took me to the barn, and I knew there would be a next time, perhaps as soon as the next day, I would use the only weapon I had: knowledge. While everyone slept, I got up silently, ignoring the pain. I took the notebook from its hiding place, looked one last time at those pages that I had copied with such care, and then hid it in a place where I knew no one would look. Inside the lining of my rag doll's Sunday dress, which sat on the high shelf, along with the few clothes I had. The next day, as I expected, my grandfather called me right after breakfast. He was calmer, almost gentle, which was even more frightening. "Let's talk in the barn," he said. "Just us two." My heart was beating so hard it seemed to want to jump out of my chest. My legs were shaking, the wounds from the day before still burning. But there was something different about me now, something I didn't fully recognize myself. It wasn't just fear, it was also expectation. I crossed the yard beside him in silence. We entered the barn and he closed the door. He took off his belt, as he always did, and wrapped it around his hand. "Now you're going to tell me what you saw in my office and where you hid it," he said, his voice dangerously soft. I looked at him directly, without lowering my eyes, as I had done for so many years. My grandfather Everett, the man I feared most in the world. And suddenly, I realized something. He was afraid of me, a skinny 13-year-old girl covered in marks. "You forgot that I know how to read," I said, the words coming out calm and clear. He stopped, confused, the belt hanging from his hand. "I read the documents in your box, Grandpa Everett," I continued, feeling each word like a stone I was throwing against his fortress. "And they're not there anymore. I left a copy with Miss Betty. She has instructions. If anything happens to me, if I disappear or turn up dead, the whole town will know the next day that the great Everett is nothing but a thief and a murderer." The silence that followed my words seemed made of glass, fragile, dangerous, ready to shatter at any sudden movement. My grandfather's face, always so authoritarian, lost its color. His hands, those hands that had so often left marks on my skin, trembled slightly. "You're lying," he said finally, his voice lower than I had ever heard. "Miss Betty wouldn't receive anything from you without my permission." It was my bluff, of course. I hadn't yet managed to give the notebook to Miss Betty. But he didn't need to know that. "Are you sure?" I asked, with a calmness that even I didn't know where it came from. "The lady who knows every plant in the county, who helped bring half the region's children into the world, who takes care of your own wife when she needs it. Do you really think she would refuse to protect a girl who shows up at her house covered in belt marks?" I saw the fear grow in his eyes. Not fear of me, a skinny girl, but fear of what I knew, of what I had in my hands, of the power of the words I had copied in that little notebook. Suddenly, like a storm that arrives without warning, his expression changed. He threw the belt on the ground and lunged at me, grabbing my arms with such force that I felt his fingers sinking into my flesh. "Where is it?" he growled, shaking me. "Where is this notebook? What did you write in it?" "I already told you," I replied, forcing myself to keep my voice steady despite the pain. "It's with Miss Betty." "Liar!" he shouted, throwing me against the wall of the barn. My head hit the wood hard, and for an instant everything went dark. "I'll tear this whole farm apart until I find it. And if I discover you're lying—" He left the threat hanging in the air, more terrible for being unspoken. He left the barn, leaving me fallen on the dirt floor. I stayed there, not moving, listening to his footsteps moving away. My whole body ached, but there was something different now. A small flame of hope. For the first time, I had seen fear in his eyes. For the first time, he had backed down. In the days that followed, life on the farm changed in a strange and silent way. My grandfather began to watch me constantly, his eyes following my every movement. He no longer took me to the barn, no longer used the belt, but his presence was like a permanent shadow. One night, I woke up to the sound of someone rummaging in my corner. It was him, kneeling on the floor, looking for something among my few things. I pretended to continue sleeping, my heart racing. After a few minutes, he gave up and left. That same night, when everyone went back to sleep, I got up silently and changed the notebook's hiding place. Instead of the doll, I put it in a hole I dug near the oak tree, behind the chicken coop, wrapped in a waxed cloth to protect it from moisture. My grandfather began to tear the whole house apart, looking for the notebook. He emptied drawers, lifted floorboards, searched the house's lining. My mother and father watched in silence, not daring to ask what he was looking for with such desperation. The tension in the house grew each day. My grandfather hardly slept, his eyes red and sunken, always vigilant. He ate little, drank more whiskey than usual, and sometimes we caught him talking to himself. The farm began to be neglected. He, who had always been so strict with work, now hardly left the house, obsessed with finding the evidence I had against him. One afternoon, when I returned from fetching water at the creek, I found my room, the corner where I slept with my sister, completely ransacked. My rag doll was torn, the Sunday dress in tatters. My 2 little books, gifts from Miss Lydia, had disappeared. I felt a pain in my chest, as if something had been torn from me, but I didn't cry. I wouldn't give him that pleasure. "Where is it?" he asked, standing in the doorway, watching my reaction. "I know it's not with Betty. I sent someone to ask her, and she knows nothing." I froze inside. If he had talked to Miss Betty, then he knew I was lying. But I kept my face impassive, as I had learned to do over the years. "Do you really think she would tell the truth?" I replied, trying to buy time. "A woman who knows what you do to me behind closed doors?" It was a stroke of luck. Miss Betty hadn't betrayed me. Maybe out of kindness, maybe out of suspicion of my grandfather. Whatever the reason, I was grateful. My grandfather's obsession with finding the notebook grew even more after that. He even broke the wall of the pantry, certain that I had hidden it there. Every corner of the farm was searched, every possible hiding place investigated. Meanwhile, the notebook remained safe, under the earth, by the oak tree, guarding its secret. But there was another problem. I needed a better plan. The lie about Miss Betty wouldn't last forever. Eventually, my grandfather would discover she really didn't know anything. And then, what would happen to me? It was at this time that I overheard a conversation between my father and a cattle driver who was passing through the region, carrying goods from one town to another. "I heard Miss Lydia is in Millsville, giving classes at Colonel Macy's house," the driver commented. "They say she set up a little school for the employees' children, too." Millsville. It wasn't that far, perhaps a full day's journey. If I could get there, find Miss Lydia. She would help me, I'm sure. She would understand the value of those documents, would know what to do with them. I began to plan my escape. I kept small portions of food that I managed to pilfer from the kitchen, a little at a time so no one would notice. I hid everything in a bundle, along with the notebook, in my hiding place near the oak tree. I studied the habits of everyone on the farm, the schedules, the routines. I needed to choose the perfect moment, when my grandfather would be far enough away that he couldn't easily catch up with me. The opportunity arose when we learned there would be a cattle fair in the county seat. My grandfather, despite his obsession with watching me, couldn't miss it. It was the most important event of the year for the farm's business. He and my father would be away for at least 2 days. On the eve of the trip, I went to my hiding place to check if everything was ready. That's when I realized I had been followed. I turned and saw my mother standing a few steps away, looking at me with an expression I couldn't decipher. "What are you hiding there, girl?" she asked, her voice low. I thought about lying, but something in her look made me hesitate. There was so much weariness there, so much resignation. But there was also something else, a spark of something I rarely saw in her. "The truth, Mother," I finally replied, "about how Grandpa got these lands, about what happened to Uncle Jeremy and Uncle Joseph." She closed her eyes for a moment, as if feeling pain. When she opened them again, she seemed both older and younger at the same time, as if a weight had been lifted and another put in its place. "I knew," she murmured. "I always knew deep down." But pretending not to know was easier. We stood in silence for a moment, the afternoon breeze moving the branches of the oak tree above us. "I'm running away tomorrow," I told her, surprising myself with the confession. "I'm going to Millsville to look for Miss Lydia." I expected her to try to stop me, to scold me, to drag me back to the house to tell my grandfather everything. Instead, she came closer and, for the first time in many years, hugged me. A hesitant, awkward hug, as if she had forgotten how to do it. "Take this," she said, pulling a small package from her apron pocket. When I opened it, I saw it was money. Not much, but more than I had ever seen at once. "I saved it from selling eggs, for an emergency." "Mother," I began, not knowing what to say. "Tomorrow morning before dawn, I'll distract them," she continued, as if she hadn't heard me. "I'll say you're sick, that you need to stay in bed. That will give you a few hours head start." I looked at her, surprised, confused, moved, all at the same time. This quiet, submissive woman who had always bowed to my grandfather's will was now helping me escape. "Why?" I finally asked. She looked far away, beyond the limits of the farm, as if she could see something I couldn't see. "Because a long time ago I too dreamed of running away," she answered simply. "And because you have the eyes of my father Jeremy. Eyes that see the truth." That night, I couldn't sleep. 1,000 thoughts spun in my head. What if my mother changed her mind? What if my grandfather discovered the plan? What if I couldn't find Miss Lydia in Millsville? What if the documents weren't enough to prove the fraud after so many years? But there was another question, bigger and more frightening. What if I succeeded? What if, after all these years of fear and pain, I could finally be free? Before dawn, as promised, my mother came to my corner. "Now," she whispered, "go now." I got up silently, already dressed and ready. I hugged my little sister Celeste, who was sleeping soundly, and whispered a goodbye she didn't hear. Then I hugged my mother one last time. "I'll come back for you," I promised. "When all this is over, I'll come back." She just nodded, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "Go with God, my daughter." I went out the back door, my heart beating hard. I went straight to the oak tree, dug up my bundle, and began to walk toward the main road. The night was beginning to give way to day, the sky lightening on the horizon. I had taken only a few steps when I heard a voice behind me. "Where do you think you're going, girl?" I turned, frozen with fear. My grandfather was standing there, his face contorted with rage, the belt already in his hand. Behind him, my mother, on her knees on the ground, a trickle of blood running from the corner of her mouth. "You really thought you could run away?" he asked, advancing slowly toward me. "That you could deceive me? Your mother tried to distract me, but I'm not a fool. Now give me that bundle." I took a step back, clutching the bundle to my chest. Inside it, along with a little food and my mother's money, was the notebook, my only weapon, my only chance. "No," I replied, my voice trembling but determined. "What?" He seemed not to believe what he had heard. "I said no," I repeated, a little louder. "I won't give it to you, and you won't beat me anymore." He laughed, a dry sound without humor. "And who's going to stop me? You? A weak girl who hasn't even grown up properly yet?" "No," I replied, finding within me a strength I didn't know I had. "The documents will stop you. The truth will stop you." His face changed, the mockery giving way to fury. He advanced toward me like an enraged bull, the belt raised. But this time, instead of cowering, instead of closing my eyes and waiting for the pain, I ran. I ran like I had never run before, clutching my bundle with all my strength, feeling the cold morning air cut my lungs. I heard his heavy footsteps behind me, his labored breathing, his shouts. He was stronger, but I was younger, faster, and I had something he didn't have, the desperate desire to be free. The chase continued across the property. My bare feet hit the hard earth, raising dust in the still damp dawn air. My grandfather was right behind, breathing heavily, cursing with each step. I ran toward the thicket at the back of the farm. If I could reach it, maybe I could hide among the trees and bushes. I was almost reaching the edge of the thicket when I felt his fingers grab my braid. He pulled so hard that I fell backward, hitting my back on the ground, the air escaping from my lungs with the impact. The bundle escaped from my arms, falling a few steps away. "The game is over," he growled, breathless, leaning over me. His face was red with effort and anger, veins bulging on his forehead. "Now you're going to give me that notebook, and then we're going to have a talk in the barn. A talk you'll never forget." I tried to crawl away, but he grabbed my arm, squeezing so hard I was sure it would leave marks. With his other hand, he reached for the bundle that had fallen. It was at that moment that something inside me burst like a dam after days of heavy rain. Years of fear, of pain, of humiliation, all of this transformed into a wave of fury that I had never felt before. With a quick movement, I grabbed a handful of dirt and threw it in his eyes. He screamed, releasing my arm to rub his eyes. I took advantage of the moment to get up and grab my bundle. But instead of running, I stood still, watching him writhe in pain. "You ungrateful wretch," he shouted, still rubbing his eyes. "I'll kill you for this." "No, you won't," I replied, with a calmness that surprised me. "Because if you kill me, the documents go straight into the hands of the county judge." He stopped, blinking rapidly, trying to clear the dirt from his eyes. When he finally managed to see me, there was something new in his gaze, beyond anger, beyond fear. There was uncertainty. "You're lying," he said, but his voice no longer had the same conviction. "Maybe," I replied, taking a step back. "Maybe not. Do you want to risk it? Do you want to risk losing everything you stole from your own family?" It was as if I had thrown a bucket of cold water on him. His face paled, and for a moment it seemed like he would collapse right there. "What do you want?" he finally asked, his voice almost a whisper. At that moment, I realized I had turned the tables. For the first time in my life, he wasn't telling me what to do. He was asking me what I wanted. "I want you to never lay a finger on me again," I replied, feeling each word like a stone I was throwing against the fortress of his power. "Or on my mother, or on my sister. Never again." He stared at me, his eyes still red from the dirt, his face a mixture of hatred and defeat. "And the documents?" "They stay with me," I said firmly. "My guarantee. If you keep your part of the bargain, no one besides us will know what's written in them." He seemed to consider this for a moment, weighing his options, which weren't many. Finally, he nodded his head, an almost imperceptible movement. "And there's one more thing," I added, taking advantage of that rare moment of advantage. "I want to learn. When school starts in town next month, I'm going to study there, every day." This made him frown, the old resistance returning. "Girls don't need schooling." "This one does," I replied, not yielding an inch, "and she will have it. Or else the documents will end up where they should have gone a long time ago." The sun was beginning to rise, casting a golden light over the field. In the distance, I heard voices calling. Probably my father, perhaps some farm workers, looking for us. We needed to end this impasse. "It's your choice, Grandpa Everett," I said, using the term grandpa almost as a provocation. "What's it going to be?" He took a deep breath, his chest rising and falling as if carrying an enormous weight. Then, in a gesture I never imagined seeing, he lowered his head. "So be it," he muttered, almost to himself. "But no one can know about this. No one." "No one will know," I agreed, "as long as you keep your part of the bargain." The voices were closer now. My grandfather straightened his shoulders, trying to recover a bit of lost dignity. "Let's go back," he said, trying to sound authoritative, but failing. "Your mother must be worried." We returned to the house in silence, walking side by side but separated by an invisible abyss. When we arrived, my mother was at the door, her face marked by worry and by the blow she had received. Her eyes went from me to my grandfather, trying to understand what had happened. "It's all right, Mother," I said, trying to convey some reassurance in my look. "Grandpa and I talked. Everything will be different now." She looked at my grandfather, suspicious, looking for signs of his explosive temper. But he just passed by her and entered the house without saying a word. That same morning, my grandfather and father left for the cattle fair in the county seat, as planned. Before leaving, my grandfather called me aside. "Where is it?" he asked in a low voice, his eyes still burning with contained rage. I knew he was referring to the notebook. "In a safe place," I replied. "And it will stay there as long as you keep our agreement." He nodded once, his lips pressed into a thin line, and left without saying anything more. When we were alone, my mother pulled me into the kitchen. "What happened out there?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I thought he was going to kill you." "I found a way to stop him, Mother," I replied, still hardly believing what I had managed to do. "He won't hurt us anymore. Not me, not you, not Celeste." "How?" she asked, her eyes wide with astonishment. I hesitated, weighing how much I should tell. Finally, I decided on the truth, or part of it. "He's afraid of what I know about him, of what I can prove." She looked at me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Be careful, daughter. He may have backed down now, but men like your grandfather don't change. They just wait for the right moment to attack again." "I know," I replied, feeling the weight of my new situation. "That's why I can't let my guard down. Ever." The days that followed were strange, tense, as if the whole farm was holding its breath. My grandfather returned from the cattle fair more quiet than ever. He didn't speak to me, hardly looked at me, but he also didn't provoke me, didn't punish me. When we crossed paths in the house or the yard, he would change course, as if I carried some contagious disease. For the others, my father, the farm workers, the neighbors, he remained the same Everett as always, authoritarian, harsh, feared. But for me and my mother, something fundamental had changed. It was as if an invisible chain had been broken. A month later, as I had demanded, I began to attend school in town. Every day, I got a ride with Mr. Jenkins, a milkman who passed by the main road at dawn and returned in the middle of the afternoon. My grandfather didn't say a word about it, but I saw his look of disapproval every time I left with my notebooks under my arm. At school, I learned things I never imagined. Numbers, history, geography, a whole world that had been kept away from me. The teacher, Mrs. Clara, was impressed with my ability to read. "Who taught you so well?" she asked, to which I only replied, "A very special friend." At night, after everyone was asleep, I would still take my little secret notebook and reread the copies of the documents, remembering the power they gave me. I had hidden the notebook in a new place, inside an empty can that I buried in the stable, under a pile of hay. No one would think to look there. One day, returning from school, I found my grandfather sitting alone on the porch, looking at the horizon. He seemed older, more tired than I remembered. I hesitated, thinking of passing by directly, but something made me stop. "Are you all right, sir?" I asked, keeping my distance. He turned his head slowly, as if the movement cost effort. "What do you think?" he replied, his voice hoarse. "I live in my own house in fear of my own granddaughter. How could I be all right?" I didn't know what to answer. For a moment I almost felt sorry for him. almost. It didn't have to be this way, I finally said. You could have been different. You could have been fair to your brothers, fair to me. He made a sound that could have been a laugh or a sigh. Justice, he muttered. You're still too young to understand how the world works, girl. Justice is for those who have the power to make justice. Then I must have some power now, I replied, feeling a chill as I said these words. Because I got a little justice for myself and my mother. He looked at me with an expression I couldn't decipher, a mixture of anger, respect, and perhaps, just perhaps, a tiny bit of remorse. You have his eyes, he said softly, the same eyes as Jeremy. He also thought he could stand up to me. And what happened to him? I asked, though I already suspected the answer. My grandfather just looked away, returning to contemplate the horizon. Go inside, girl. It's getting dark. That conversation on the porch was one of the rare moments when we exchanged more than necessary words. Our coexistence had transformed into a kind of cold war, a heavy silence loaded with unspoken threats and tacit agreements. He kept his word. He never laid a finger on me or my mother again. He never dragged me to the barn, never used the belt. But his eyes followed me constantly, vigilant, waiting for a slip, a moment of weakness. And I also kept my part. The documents remained hidden, our shared secret. A secret that had transformed the executioner into prisoner and the victim into jailer. At night, lying on my mat, I often wondered if I had done the right thing, if I shouldn't have delivered those documents to the authorities, sought true justice for my grandfather's brothers, for my family. But then I remembered the fear in my mother's eyes, the fragility of my little sister, the uncertainty of the world out there. No, that silent agreement was the best I could do at that moment. I had achieved safety for myself and my mother, had achieved education, had achieved a little respect. It was enough, for now. Time passed, and I continued studying. My notebook remained hidden, my guarantee, my insurance policy. And while I grew in knowledge and confidence, my grandfather seemed to diminish, to hunch under the weight of his own secret, his own exposed evil. But I knew, deep in my heart, that this situation wouldn't last forever. One day I would have to make a definitive choice. One day I would have to decide whether to stay on that farm, in that life of precarious balance, or seek my true freedom. That day came sooner than I expected, when I turned 15. And it was the beginning of a new phase of my life, a phase that would take me far from that farm to a path I never imagined I would follow. My 15th birthday arrived without parties or celebrations. On my grandfather's farm, birthdays were not cause for celebration. They were just another day of work. But for me, that day would be different. Not because anyone would remember the date, but because I had made a decision. After almost 2 years living in that tense truce with my grandfather, attending school in town and guarding my secret like a treasure, I had come to a conclusion. It wasn't enough. The freedom I had won was fragile, conditional, always dependent on the fear my grandfather had of being exposed. It wasn't true freedom. At school, I had stood out. Mrs. Clara said I had a mind as sharp as a razor, that I learned too quickly to stay in that little country school. You should go to Birmingham, she told me. There are better schools there. You could even think about becoming a teacher. The idea of becoming a teacher, like Miss Lydia, made my heart beat faster. Imagining myself teaching other children to read, opening for them the same world of possibilities that had been opened for me, it was a dream I didn't even know I could have. But how? I had no money. I didn't know anyone in Birmingham, and my grandfather certainly wouldn't let me go. Even though our silent agreement protected me from physical punishments, he still controlled everything on the farm. The money, the decisions, the comings and goings. The answer came in an unexpected way, one May afternoon, when I was returning from school. On the way home, Mr. Jenkins' wagon broke a wheel. While we waited for help to arrive, he struck up a conversation. I heard your Aunt Carol is back in Birmingham, he commented, lighting a corncob pipe. I was surprised. I almost never heard about my Aunt Carol, my mother's sister. She had left the region many years ago after marrying a merchant from Birmingham. My grandfather didn't like her name being mentioned. He said she was a loose woman, just because she had chosen a path different from what he thought appropriate. Really? I replied, trying not to show too much interest. Did you see her? Yes, I did. I was in Birmingham last week delivering a shipment. She has a boarding house now near the market. Her husband died, left the business to her. She's thriving from what I saw. A boarding house in Birmingham. An aunt I barely knew but who represented a possibility. An idea began to form in my head. Do you go to Birmingham often? I asked, trying to sound casual. Every first Monday of the month, he replied, puffing out a cloud of smoke. I take merchandise from here, bring some from there. It's good business. I stored that information like a treasure. The first Monday of the next month would be in 2 weeks. Enough time to plan, to prepare. That night, after everyone was asleep, I took the notebook from its hiding place in the stable. I sat under the faint light of the moon that came in through the small window and leafed through those pages that had changed my life. The copies of the documents, the evidence of my grandfather's fraud, my guarantee of safety for so long. But now, I needed more than safety. I needed true freedom. The next day, I sought out my mother when we were alone in the yard, hanging clothes. Mother, I began softly, do you still talk to Aunt Carol? She stopped what she was doing, looking around to make sure no one was listening. Why do you want to know that? I heard she's back in Birmingham, that she has a boarding house there. My mother sighed, going back to hanging a sheet on the line. Carol was always different from me. Braver, more determined. When our parents died, she refused to come live here, even though our father insisted. She said she wouldn't be governed by him. She found work in Birmingham, then met Ernest. They got married. Do you have her address? I interrupted, getting straight to the point. My mother looked at me with a mixture of surprise and understanding. I do, she answered after a moment. But why do you want to know? I need to get out of here, Mother, I said, feeling my heart accelerate as I said those words out loud. I want to continue studying. I want to be a teacher. Here, even with our agreement, I'll never be truly free. She didn't seem surprised by my decision. Perhaps she had expected this. Perhaps she even wanted this for me, deep in her heart. It's dangerous, she said, looking around again. Your grandfather would never allow it. He doesn't need to allow it, I replied. He just needs not to know until it's too late. That same afternoon, my mother handed me a folded paper hidden inside a ball of yarn. Carol's address, she whispered. And one more thing. She opened her hand, revealing a small silver brooch, simple but beautiful, with a blue stone in the center. It was my mother's. Carol has one just like it. Show it to her so she'll know you're really my daughter. I hugged my mother tightly, feeling tears in my eyes. I'll come back for you, I promised again, as I had done that dawn 2 years before. When I can, when it's safe. I know, she replied, stroking my hair. But first you need to build your own life. The following 2 weeks were the longest of my life. I continued my normal routine, helping with household chores, going to school, keeping my distance from my grandfather, but inside, my mind was buzzing with plans. I gathered my few clothes, the money I had saved giving private lessons to younger children at school, something Mrs. Clara had suggested, and that my grandfather, surprisingly, hadn't forbidden, perhaps because it brought some extra money home, and of course my notebook with the documents. I hid everything inside a bundle made with an old sheet, which I kept under my mat. When the first Monday of the month came, I got up before dawn, as I always did, to go to school. But instead of waiting for Mr. Jenkins on the main road with my notebooks, I took my hidden bundle and a note from my mother, explaining that I was going to Birmingham to look for Aunt Carol. Are you sure you want to go all the way to Birmingham? Mr. Jenkins asked when I told him my plan. It's a big city, girl, and your grandfather will be furious. I'm sure, I replied firmly. My aunt is expecting me. It was a small lie, but necessary to convince him. He scratched his head, undecided. I don't know. I don't want trouble with Everett. I hesitated for a moment, then made a decision. I opened my bundle and took out the notebook. Mr. Jenkins, can you read? He nodded, looking confused. Then read this, I said, opening the notebook to the pages I had copied with such care. Read, and you'll understand why I need to leave here, and why my grandfather won't do anything to stop me. As he read, I saw his face change, first confusion, then surprise, and finally a kind of sorrowful understanding. I always suspected there was something wrong with the story of those lands, he muttered, returning the notebook to me. Jeremy was a good man. I never believed that story about the horse fall. So will you help me? I asked, putting the notebook back in the bundle. He looked at me for a long time, then nodded. I will. But you have to promise me one thing. If your aunt can't take you in, you come back with me next month. I don't want to have on my conscience a girl alone in Birmingham. I promise, I replied, feeling a weight lift from my shoulders. Thank you, Mr. Jenkins. You won't regret it. The journey to Birmingham was the longest of my life up to that point. I had never gone beyond the county seat, had never seen a big city. When we finally arrived, it was already late afternoon. The paved streets, the two-story houses, the stores with colorful windows, everything seemed out of a dream. Mr. Jenkins left me at the door of Aunt Carol's boarding house, a yellow two-story building near the market, as he had said. Good luck, girl, he said, helping me down from the wagon. I'll be back in a month. If you need anything, I'll be around until tomorrow, taking care of my business. I thanked him again and stood on the sidewalk, holding my bundle, looking at the boarding house door. Now that I was there, a wave of doubts assaulted me. What if my aunt didn't recognize me? What if she didn't want to help me? What if she sent me back? I took a deep breath and knocked on the door. A middle-aged woman answered, wearing an apron over a simple dress. She had dark hair with some white strands tied in a bun and lively, curious eyes. I recognized in her some features of my mother, although she was taller and more robust. Yes? She asked, wiping her hands on her apron. Aunt Carol? I said, my voice almost failing. I'm Eleanor. Josie's daughter. She looked me up and down, her eyes widening in recognition. Good heavens! Josie's daughter! What are you doing here, girl? Did something happen? I came looking for you, I replied, feeling the tears I had held back all day finally escape. I need help. Without hesitation, she pulled me inside, closing the door behind us. Come. Let's talk inside. At the back of the boarding house was a small living room, cozy and clean. She made me sit on a worn but comfortable sofa and brought a glass of water with sugar. Now tell me everything, she said, sitting beside me. What happened? Why did you come alone? Does your mother know you're here? Between tears and sobs, I told my story. Not everything. Some parts were too painful to share, but enough for her to understand why I had run away, why I couldn't go back. That monster, she muttered when I finished, her eyes shining with anger. I always knew Everett was bad, but I never imagined. Poor Josie, trapped with him all these years. I took from the bundle the silver brooch my mother had given me. My mother sent this. She said you have one just like it. Aunt Carol took the brooch, caressing it with her fingers. Tears shone in her eyes. Yes, she said, pulling a chain she wore hidden under her dress. Hanging from it was an identical brooch. It was our mother's. She gave one to each of us before she died. We were silent for a moment, united by the memory of people I had never known. My maternal grandmother, my maternal grandfather, normal people it seemed, not monsters like my grandfather Everett. You can stay here, Aunt Carol finally said, as long as you need. I have a small room in the back, small but clean, and you can help me at the boarding house if you want. I want to continue studying, I said, feeling a spark of hope light up inside me. I want to be a teacher. She smiled, a smile that lit up her tired face. Of course. There's a good school nearby. I'll talk to the principal tomorrow. That night, lying in a real bed, not a mat on the floor, but a bed with a mattress and clean sheets, I looked out the window at the starry sky of Birmingham and cried. Not from sadness, but from relief, from gratitude, from hope. For the first time in my life, I felt I could breathe freely, that I could dream, that I could be who I really was. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. I began to study at the local school, helped Aunt Carol at the boarding house in my spare time, and gradually, I built a new life. When Mr. Jenkins returned the following month, I told him I was fine, that I had been well received, that I didn't need to go back. "And your grandfather?" he asked. "Didn't he come after you?" I shook my head. "No, and he won't. He knows it's not advantageous for him." Mr. Jenkins nodded, understanding. "You're a smart girl, Eleanor. Smarter than many grown men I know." He brought me a note from my mother, few words written in shaky handwriting, but which meant the world to me. "We're fine. He didn't do anything. Follow your path. I love you." 3 years later, at 18, I had finished the normal course and become a teacher. My first job was at a primary school on the outskirts of Birmingham. Poor children, many who had never held a book before. I saw in them the same sparkle in the eyes that I must have had when Miss Lydia taught me the first letters. It was at this time that I received the news. My grandfather Everett had died. A stroke, they said. Quick, without suffering, more than he deserved, I thought bitterly. I returned for the funeral, not for him, but for my mother, my sister, my father. The farm seemed smaller than I remembered, more decadent. People spoke in respectful whispers about the late Everett, the respected man of the region. If they only knew. After the burial, when everyone had already gone, I stayed a moment longer by the grave. I took from my pocket the old notebook, the one I had carried with me for so many years, my weapon, my salvation. "It's over," I said softly to the simple headstone. "You can't hurt anyone anymore." I put the notebook back in my pocket. It wasn't yet time to reveal that truth to the world. Perhaps it never would be. Some truths are too heavy to carry, some stories too painful to tell. My mother and my sister Celeste, now 14 years old, came to live with me in Birmingham. My father decided to stay on the farm. It was the only world he knew, he said. I respected his decision, although it hurt to leave him behind. Over time, I built my career as a teacher, always carrying with me the love for books, for words, for the knowledge that had liberated me. And it was thus, teaching others to read, that I found my true vocation. And later, restoring old books, I found a way to preserve not only the stories written on the pages, but also my own story, a story of pain, yes, but also of courage, of resistance, of overcoming. Today, at 78 years old, I live a quiet life here in Coopersville, Pennsylvania. How did I end up here? That's a story that involves love, destiny, and many twists and turns along the way. After years of teaching in Birmingham, I met Gerald, a math teacher who had the kindest eyes I've ever seen. We fell in love, got married, and had 2 children, Elizabeth and Matthew. We formed a small, close family, full of books, conversations, and much respect, everything I didn't have in my childhood. Gerald received an invitation to direct a school in Coopersville, and here we came, almost 30 years ago. My mother and my sister Celeste remained in Birmingham. Celeste got married, had children, built her own life. My mother lived to be 83, a long life, which in its final chapters was finally serene. My husband left this world 15 years ago, a heart attack that took him in his sleep. I miss him every day, but I'm grateful for the years we had together, for the children we raised, for the life we built. Elizabeth lives in Philadelphia. She's a doctor, has 3 children who are my pride. Matthew is in California. He's an engineer, married an American, and gave me 2 grandchildren who are the joy of my life. They come to visit me when they can, and I visit them once a year. Technology helps keep the family united. We make video calls every week, share photos, remain present in each other's lives. When I retired from teaching at 65, I needed something to occupy my hands and my mind. That's when I rediscovered an old passion: books. Not just to read, but to care for, to restore, to give new life. I started with that neighbor's recipe book, remember? And then came others, and more others, until I became known in the region as the lady who fixes books. I set up a small workshop on my porch. I have all the necessary tools: needles of various sizes, special threads, glues, papers of different textures and weights, leathers and fabrics for covers, small presses. A small universe dedicated to saving stories. People bring me books of all kinds: old family books with records of births and marriages, recipe notebooks passed down from generation to generation, novels worn by time and the love of many readings, even historical documents that are sometimes found in old trunks. Each book has its own history, both what is written on its pages and what is engraved in its marks of use, in its stains, in its damages. When I work on a book, I feel as if I'm conversing with it, knowing its secrets, its journeys. I have a special corner on the shelf for the books I love most. The 2 little books that Miss Lydia gave me so many years ago didn't survive. My grandfather destroyed them that day in his fury, but I never forgot them, and throughout my life, I found similar copies that I keep with affection. They are my silent tribute to that traveling teacher who changed my destiny by teaching me to read. There is also an old notebook with a faded leather cover. Yes, that same notebook where I copied my grandfather's documents. The pages are yellowed, the ink is weak in some points, but the words are still there, silent witnesses of a time that is past. I never showed this notebook to anyone after my grandfather's funeral. It's a secret I carry with me, a reminder of the power that words have, to hurt, but also to liberate. My daily routine is simple and rewarding. I wake up early with the sun. I have my coffee on the porch, watching the birds in the yard. Then I dedicate a few hours to my books, either restoring others or reading my own. In the afternoon, I receive visitors, friends from the neighborhood, former students who still come to consult me about some doubt, young people interested in the art of restoration who come to learn a little. Once a week, I go to the local school to give a reading workshop for children. Seeing those little eyes light up when they discover a new story reminds me of myself, of that magical moment when Miss Lydia opened the world of letters to me. I have a small garden in the back of the house where I grow herbs and some flowers. I like to feel the earth in my hands, to follow the growth of the plants, to pick fresh basil for the sauce, mint for tea, rosemary to perfume the house. There is something deeply comforting in seeing life sprout from the earth. On Sundays, I go to the little church in the square. My relationship with God is simple and direct, without intermediaries, without fanaticism, without fears. I believe in a God of love, not in the vengeful and cruel God my grandfather preached. I pray for those who have already departed. I give thanks for those who are here. I ask for protection for those who will come. Life has taught me that scars can hurt, but they also make us stronger. Each mark I carry, and there are many, although most are invisible to the eyes, is a reminder of something I overcame, a battle I won. I don't hold a grudge against my grandfather. It's not that I've forgiven him. Some things go beyond forgiveness. But I understood that carrying hatred is like drinking poison, expecting the other person to die. I chose not to give him that power over me, not even after his death. What I carry with me, what I try to pass on to my children, my grandchildren, my students, is what I learned on that isolated farm in rural Alabama. That knowledge is the most powerful weapon, that words can build bridges where before there were abysses, that education is the surest path to freedom. When I look back at the frightened girl I was, I feel a mixture of sadness and pride. Sadness for what she suffered, pride for the strength she found within herself to survive, to fight, to transform her own story. And when I look ahead, to the time I still have left in this world, I feel peace. I built a good life, full of meaning. I loved and was loved. I taught and learned. I fell and got up. I lost and found. Here, in my little house in Coopersville, with my books, my memories, my small daily joys, I feel that I've completed a circle. The girl who found refuge in words became the woman who gives refuge to words, preserving them, caring for them, passing them on. And you know what? There's no place I'd rather be. My dear ones who have followed me this far, I want to leave you with some words that come from the bottom of my heart. Words that I've carried with me throughout this long journey, and that perhaps can light up the path a little for someone who is going through difficult times. If you're living in a situation of oppression, of abuse, of constant fear, know that you're not alone. I know well what it's like to feel trapped in an invisible cage, where the chains aren't made of iron, but of threats, of manipulations, of words that hurt more than slaps. I know what it's like to go to sleep afraid and wake up with anxiety, to live in a constant state of alert, measuring every word, every gesture, so as not to provoke the fury of those who should protect you. But I want to tell you, looking into your eyes through these words, that there is a way out. It may not be easy, it may not be quick, but it exists. And that exit begins within yourself, in your ability to believe that you deserve something better, that you have the right to a dignified life, free from fear and humiliation. I learned that age doesn't define our strength, but rather our ability to start anew each day. When I fled that farm at 15, I had only the clothes on my back, an old notebook, and the determination to build a different life. It wasn't easy. Nothing worthwhile is easy. But each step took me further from that place of pain, closer to who I could truly be. My wrinkles are maps of survival. Each one tells a story of pain overcome. I carry in my body the invisible marks of my grandfather's purification rituals. But I also carry the certainty that these marks don't define me. What defines me are the choices I made afterward, the love I built, the lives I touched through teaching, the books I restored and preserved for future generations. Life taught me that even in the deepest darkness, our inner light never goes out. Even in the darkest moments on that farm, when it seemed there was no hope, something inside me remained lit. A small flame fed by hidden books, by secret words, by knowledge that no one could take from me. I never allowed my dignity to be stolen, even when they tried to take everything from me. My body might have been trapped, but my mind remained free, flying through the pages of books, imagining different worlds, dreaming of possibilities that seemed distant, but one day became reality. I discovered that we are stronger than we imagine, especially when we think we can't take any more. There's a reserve of strength within each of us, a resilience that we only discover when we're truly tested. You have that strength too, believe me. Perhaps you haven't discovered it yet, but it's there, waiting for the right moment to manifest. Time doesn't heal all wounds, but it teaches us to live with them and still smile. I won't say I've forgotten what I lived through, that I don't still have occasional nightmares, that I don't startle at sudden noises. The scars remain, but I've learned not to let them control my life, define who I am, limit what I can be. My story isn't about what they did to me, but about how I chose to respond. I could have become bitter, resentful, perpetuating the cycle of pain. Instead, I chose to transform my experience into something positive, teaching other children, restoring old books, sharing my story so others know they're not alone. I learned that true strength isn't in never falling, but in rising every time. And there were many falls throughout life, many moments of doubt, fear, wanting to give up. But in each of these moments, I found the strength to get up again, to take another step, to keep believing that tomorrow could be better than today. Abuse leaves invisible scars, but recovery shows that we can flourish even after the storm. Like those plants that sprout in arid terrain, that find a path between rocks, that adapt and survive in the most adverse conditions, we too can flourish in unlikely soils, transforming pain into strength, trauma into wisdom. I discovered that my voice, even trembling, has power when I decide to use it. When I confronted my grandfather that dawn, when I said no for the first time, I felt the power that exists in simply speaking the truth, in naming the abuse, in refusing to continue being a victim. And it's this power that I want to pass on to you, who may still be seeking your own voice. Age has given me the wisdom to understand that it's never too late to start over. At 15, at 30, at 50, at 70 years old, we can always turn the page, start a new chapter, rewrite our story. Each dawn is a new chance, each day an opportunity to choose a different path. My experience taught me that our story doesn't end with the painful chapters. The abuse I suffered in childhood and adolescence was just the beginning of my journey, not its final destination. What came after? Education, marriage, children, career, retirement, the life I built here in Coopersville, were chapters that I wrote myself, with the ink of my courage and the pen of my determination. I learned that surviving is a form of resistance, and living well is the best revenge. Each happy day I lived after escaping that farm was a victory, proof that my grandfather didn't manage to break my spirit, didn't manage to define who I would be. My full and happy life, full of love and purpose, is my silent response to everything he tried to take from me. If you're facing a similar situation, know that there are people ready to help everywhere. Seek support, a trusted friend, a teacher, a religious leader, a health professional. Contact authorities and organizations that exist to protect people in vulnerable situations. Don't be ashamed to ask for help. It's not weakness, it's wisdom. Always remember, you are not to blame for the abuse you suffer. No one deserves to be mistreated, humiliated, assaulted. The fault is always with the abuser, never the victim. And you deserve a dignified, safe, happy life, no matter what they tell you, no matter how much they try to convince you otherwise. And for you, my dear friends, who have accompanied me to this point, on this journey of memories, pains, and overcomings, I want to make a special request. If this story touched your heart, if any of my words found an echo within you, please share this video immediately. Share it right now. We never know who might need to hear exactly these words at this moment. Subscribe to Grandparents' Tales and hit the notification bell, because each subscription is a way of saying that stories like mine matter, that the voices of people who survived abuse deserve to be heard. When you subscribe, you're helping to carry these words of hope to more people who may be living their darkest moment, desperately needing to know they're not alone. And leave in the comments the word "free" if you watched until here. This simple word will show me that you really heard my story, that you understood the most important message I want to leave, that knowledge, education, the courage to say no are the paths to true freedom. Do this now. Don't wait even one more minute. Your action could be the first step to saving someone who is suffering in silence, someone who needs to know there is a way out, that there is hope, that there is life beyond abuse. Thank you so much for listening to me. May God bless each one of you, and may the light of knowledge and hope always illuminate your paths.